Hi, I'm Nicole.
And I'm Leah.
Welcome to the author narrator sessions where we take you behind the scenes to the makings of the audiobooks for the Song of the King's Heart trilogy. We've been putting questions out on Facebook to readers and listeners. And today's question was about audiobooks in general, and Audible. And do you like them? Do you prefer them to print books? Why do you listen to them? Do you think that they'll ever overtake print books in terms of a commodity or in marketing? And then I asked, do people have favorite narrators? But what's a little more interesting to me is, can a narrator have groupies? So, because this is a whole new, not new, they've been around a while, but it is an entertainment sphere. And yet no one ever sees your face as a narrator, just like as a writer. So there's sort of like writers have groupies, can narrators also have groupies? And one of the first questions we got, which was very interesting and sort of like, is one reader said she only listens to audiobooks in the car. That's it. And another one said she only listens to them when she goes for walks. And so I wondered, from my standpoint, I'm going to go with the first one. I only listen to audiobooks in the car. I don't listen to them when I walk, and inside my house, because I don't live alone, to walk around with headphones on all day or whatever, even for a little bit, has always felt a little antisocial, even though my kids kind of do it with their YouTube on. To fall in love and deep into a story, which is what happens to me in fiction, like whether it's an audiobook or a print book, I'm there. And to have the interruptions of my family is just sort of like, whoa, no, I'm actually doing something. You can't talk to me. So audiobooks have never come in my life except when traveling. And with the commute gone in COVID, I have 14 credits in Audible. And the only audiobook I've listened to is yours, Leah, Origins. Since my commute went away. So,
That's great.
What about you and what you think about that? And, like these two different readers, or listeners, what they both love them, but one will only do them in the car. And the other one is like, I don't want them in the car. I want to walk with them. And,
I think that I've heard varied responses from people and maybe it's based on preference, maybe habit, maybe circumstance, like what you're saying about shared space, or I don't want to hear through a headphone all the time. I'm definitely dealing with some of that myself. Especially since COVID, I've been working remotely on Zoom calls and, earphones all the time. So for me, some of my friends, we've just had conversations about, because that's now more prevalent in our daytime, what used to be in the evening of maybe streaming something to watch, or your version of whether it's, television or streaming, that visual entertainment at the end of the day is losing its appeal, at least for me and some of my friends. So, though I really do enjoy switching it up. So audiobooks or podcasts, I do think that there's a place for it in my life. I tend to actually share with others, so like if you're cooking dinner together, I studied journalism and focused on radio journalism. So the sound of music and someone's voice to me is home. I enjoy visual media, and I enjoy what I enjoy doing, and what I enjoy receiving isn't always the same. And I do want to switch it up. So for me with audiobooks, it's really, I tend to only listen to them in long car rides because, it's something that breaks it up. I also listen to it at the end of the day, usually as I'm making dinner, or something like that. And then as far as groupies or whatnot, I'm sure that they exist. And I think that there are some audio artists who are very, very dedicated to creating the sound, but may not listen on their own.
Right.
And I'm on that journey myself of figuring out where I want to be on that. I'm just going to trust in myself that because I like to mix things up and I like variation, I'll probably like to change things as a whole. But for me, I think that audiobooks, if you it's based on recommendation, to be honest. I first started doing audiobooks because my aunt and a good friend were like, I just heard this book. It's amazing. You need to hear it. And sometimes because I like to read, I would say, well, should I read it first? And they're like, well, you should always read it first. But if your first introduction to it is hearing it, why don't you hear it? And because I have a lot of characters in my head, I enjoy reading first so I can have my own voice. But I think that there are wonderful narrators and voiceover artists out there, whether they're famous or on the big screen or just famous in their own realm or just starting out and just have a really great voice. I think that there are people that connect to things through sound, and that is important to them. And so I do think that audiobooks will always remain as long as people enjoy hearing something.
Well, and I was thinking about that with, I had a reader say, even though the other two books are out, she will only do the Audible books and she's waiting for the next one. And because that's just what she does. I've had a couple people say this to me. They just only do Audible books because they don't, and this is an interesting thing, they don't have a time to sit down and read. But I actually don't have the time to listen because it takes longer. I can read faster than you can speak. So for me, if I want to slip a book in my very busy life, I'll get it done faster. And my son and I had this discussion because he's 22 and he loves both. Right. But if he needs to get it done, he will sit and read it. And he listened to The Wheel of Time, which is like 12 books, probably dedicated a year and a half of his life listening to this back and forth to school, here, there, the other thing. And then he realized that he wanted to finish the last book, but he didn't have the time for it. And so he just read it and got it done, in a night. So there is that aspect of, what do we want? But what I liked when the kids were little is we listened to a lot of children's stories read and narrated. And you mentioned, actors, famous people are, like I had a friend say, you want to listen to this book because Tom Hanks narrates it,
right.
It's like, great, Tom Hanks narrates it. That's true. But for example, one of my favorite books that I've never even read, I've only listened to it on Audible because that's how it was introduced to me. I said, I need something for my trip. And someone said, you want A Gentleman in Moscow. And it's an amazing novel, right? And it's an award-winning novel, but oh my gosh, as an audiobook, I don't know if I would ever want to read it, right? Because the narrator is so enchanting, but I don't know his name. I didn't memorize his name. I'm not following him on Instagram, but he's, I'm his groupie. Like, I'll tell you that, like, if for some reason I knew when he was going to do something again, I would probably listen to anything he did because that was so good. If I were, so people do this.
Yes.
And in the fantasy world, my son told me there are narrators and you want it. There's, if that person is narrating it, I'm going to listen to it because they're known in that world for doing such a good job.
You remind me, that little story reminded me of when I was back in college. I had a little program that I was on, and there was a bunch of us, and we would have a late night radio show. And I mean, honestly, it was, news. It was not fiction or anything like that, but we encouraged people to call in and recommend stories that they wanted us to report on. And I remember we got a call after it aired, and the DJ who was on after us said, hey, we just got a call that somebody just said, whoever that reporter is, she's got the best voice and I will always tune in. And it just goes to show that, some people connect with some sound. And I know for me, there's something in, my family used to say Leah's very musical, like you can just mimic or hear things. And I do think that my ears are my strength. I do connect to sound a lot more than anything else. And so when I listen to an audiobook, I'm actually listening to how they breathe and their turns of phrase. And that was so like some people listen to the story or they just like the voice. like the technique, and I hear the story and I like it, and I love to hear the skill of really strong artists. But for me, it's always going to be just the sounds of like, oh, they made that sound. Oh, I wonder, you have to do that with that part of your voice, and you're not like, I'm just going there. It's
Yeah.
so interesting. Like, and that's
Well,
what I do.
that's so funny. There's like this saying that the best way to destroy a writing career is to get an MFA in creative writing, because you suddenly are such a critic, because critiquing and learning elements of style is so core to such a thing that you no longer get to enjoy your own writing or anyone else's writing when you're done, because you're like, oh, you're always picking it out, even when you're impressed. You're like, and then they use that, and then they use that, and it's sort of like, oh, you can be freer. Like, I just listened to an audiobook, and when you mentioned music, the children's stories that I said, I used to listen to a lot of those with the kids. Like, you're exhausted, and I didn't want to put them in front of the TV. So I'd be like, okay, I'm cooking dinner, and I'd put on a story for them. They pick out a CD and put it into their little their little boom box that they had, and they'd listen on the floor while I was cooking dinner. So I did do it that way. And they had a lot of musical elements in children's audio books. I mean, they were just recorded stories back then because Audible didn't exist, but they had lots of singing, music, noises, kind of like a radio show, right?
Yeah.
And I often wonder why Audible books don't have that so much. Like, I haven't listened to tons. There's like sometimes an intro song or an outro song, but in terms of like bringing that into the storytelling and bringing in music and noises, and I get that would up the production
Right.
cost. But why don't we have that in the adult stories the same way?
We've had some very interesting conversations about how things evolve, and
Yeah.
how, when something starts, there might be the promise of something. There's also a deviation, and there's also all the variation in between.
Right.
And so for me, I think what you're talking about, and I grew up with some of that too, like radio plays
Yeah.
and
Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, like,
all,
great.
and also a lot of it came from that concept of radio play, where
Mhm.
is sound a character that
Yeah.
needs to be sent through this. So it's not just someone reading the story. It is like, I know when I was growing up, around Halloween, we would always listen to radio plays or recorded tapes of a scary story. And
Mhm.
it was just like dun 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 is always something like
But like,
very
yeah,
big,
around the
just
bonfire, right? Like,
right.
tell me scary stories around the bonfire.
And
Yeah.
it was a newness, because we also did the real face-to-face stuff, but then this was a new thing for us that it had a place, and we usually implemented it at certain times of year, and that was it. And then during the holidays, sometimes my mother would play a record, which was a recorded version of like a radio play. So they're telling a story, they have songs, and then
And the
interviews
knocking
as
on the
well.
door.
Right. And all that stuff too. And I just thought that that was magic. And I think this is just, I haven't done any research on it, just answering your question. I think that the audiobook is serving the promise of what it is. It's an audiobook, someone is reading it.
Reading you the story.
Whether it's multiple people reading it to play characters, one person, and that's slightly different from what a podcast is. I think a podcast does add more elements. Usually they have an intro and outro and some songs, and maybe radio journalism adds sound from the place. And so I think that these are different things that we're playing with to see, do we then create an audio production, and are they things that people want? I think it goes back to your comment about time. I
Time.
know for me, audiobooks, I listen to them in like 15-minute chunks, or if I have to bake something for like 40 minutes or an
And I
hour or
can't
something.
read a story like that, though.
Right.
That's the problem. I get so deep. Nonfiction doesn't count here. I started becoming a nonfiction queen after I gave birth, because it was like, I got 10 minutes on the toilet while someone's not bothering me. I'm going to read this book that's essays,
Right.
essays, and never fiction, because the moment you give me fiction, I'm like, why are you in my life? Do not come and disturb me. And so I can't listen to a good story for 15 minutes. It's like, it's so painful, like chalk. Your nails on a chalkboard. I can't do it. And so I don't do it as a result?
I think it's a matter of different strokes for different folks.
Yes.
That's what I'm thinking.
So you can leave a story and come back to it.
Always. I think I can do it better when I love the voice, because I just, to me, I want to hear that voice. I might need to rewind. I tend to stop on chapter marks, so it's easier, but
Right.
it's kind of like an old friend, whether you're reading it or listening to it. It's like, oh, I want to listen to this story right now. Um, and what I've also noticed, and I noticed a bit of it in your writing too, there seems, in my observation, some audiobooks have an element of making sure some topics are rewoven in, so that if for the people who might drown out, they come back in and they're not
Right.
lost.
Or get interrupted. And
Right. Yeah.
because life is interruptions. It
Yeah.
really is. You can't live a life without good stories just because you don't have time for them to have them all at once,
Mhm.
and so that's definitely, but I get very consumed by a story, whether I'm writing it or reading it. I like to be immersed in it, and I don't like to be interrupted unless I've set the timer. And even then it's like, what happens next? Oh my God, what am I going to do? I have to go do this and not know. And that's
I
really hard.
know.
It's
I
really hard on me.
I know. I used to be, I'm less of it now, but I used to be that type of person that would have like 4 books that I'm reading simultaneously. And it was like I would chunk them and not because of time. It was more of like, okay, I've had enough of this one. I'm moving on to this one. And I would finish like 4 books at a time. I was not a
Wow.
1 book person.
Holy
And
cow.
I would read articles as well. And maybe it was because I was a journalism major and a lit minor. Like I had a system of doing many
And
different
you were
things.
often reading lots of things.
I was reading tons.
Right. Yeah.
But with sound, and now at this stage in my life, I actually like just investing. Like, no, I'm going to finish this and then I'll move on to the next one. And I, like you, I read very quickly. So, but I can change it up. But I do notice that I really just, I think for a lot of people that it's just whatever draws them to it. It could be the sound, it could be the person, it could be the story, the way the story is told, because they're different techniques too. Sometimes it's really just read it almost as if it's a bedtime story tone.
Right.
Sometimes it's add more characterization. There are those prompts that narrators and voiceover artists either add or receive instruction. So there are different ways to do it. I know for me, I have a little bit of fun in the booth and sometimes say, I think I'm reading it this way, but let's just do it like a news announcer because it's fun. And I don't show it on the final print, but I do have fun in the booth of just like, I want to read it like I'm a sports announcer right now.
Okay. Speaking of that, totally off topic, but the sports announcer, are you guys trained in that? Since you did go to broadcast school, like every time they all have the sound. What is that? Is there a class? Is there like?
Well, when I went to school, that was definitely a topic, and it was not something that was taught at all. However, times have changed, and there's more out there for what can be taught of how to use your voice and how to say it and when. But it was, at least when I was coming up, it was more of you learn that on the job of what the expectation is. And more often than not, it was, you weren't taught it. It was, don't do it like that ever again. Like it was just an instruction of that's not how we do it.
But there's obviously a mimicry going on there because all these different people sound exactly the same.
And I have, right.
You can have that voice like in some of those games where it's like, say this, but in that voice, like with the French accent, or in the sportscaster, voice. And everyone knows that's the voice.
Right. There's a funny YouTube video out there, or a TikTok video, I'm not sure which one, of she's a news anchor and she's just saying, I'm going to talk to my boyfriend in the news anchor voice for 30 minutes and see if I annoy him. And throughout, she's just writing like he's ticked, because like immediately he's like, don't talk to me like that, and I've done that. Sure. Like sometimes I would just come home and talk to someone in an accent and they'd be like, stop it. I was like, but it's fun.
Well,
So,
I think if you ever need some fun, what I would love to hear is one of the sex magic scenes in the sportscaster announcer voice, just for me. But I bet listeners would like that too.
I hand in this corner.
That could be my 50th birthday present.
I can definitely, I can do it.
It's we're gonna miss. No.
Well, I think it's just what I definitely can do it, and now it's in my brain, so now it's not gonna not be done.
Oh no. Well, I'm excited. When my publisher told me that we could do an audiobook of the series, I was very excited. It's very different. It's not something I would normally do, but going through the process and watching it, like maybe I don't buy and use audiobooks very much, but now I have, as a creator, watching it then go that direction in your hands has been really just inspiring and exciting. And I'm really glad they decided to do it, because it's neat. And more people are reading it and hearing it because this is their preferred form of storytelling. So,
and I think a lot of people will continue to want to hear stories being told. And I look forward to releasing it soon.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Take care.